Thanks, Dennis. As he mentioned, I had him in a couple of my classes. Oh, incidentally, before we start, at both ends of the stage is this handout called Interesting and Probably Useless Facts About Skin Microbes. So if you didn't pick one up and you don't get totally disgusted today, grab one of these. As Dennis mentioned, he was in a couple of my classes, and unknown to him, I found my class register book. And Dennis, one of the classes you had with me, you did really well. But what happened to cell biology? Actually, I'm kidding. He got an A in that one, too. Well, today's topic is about our skin. Very important to us. And the title is The Life That Lives on Us. And I'm looking at this as kind of a safari over the surface of our skin, the plains, hills, valleys, lakes, and streams of the human integument, which is our skin. And I'm the safari leader. Well, here are the skin is very important, and that's reflected in part by all the phrases that have entered common speech that are concerned with the skin, and here are some of them. There are many more that might occur to you, but these are the ones that I came up with on short notice. Skin is the largest organ of our body, anywhere from 12 to 15% by weight of our body. And the average man being 5'8" and about 150 pounds, has about 1.8 square meters or about 19 plus square feet of skin. The average woman at 5.5 feet or 5 feet 5 inches has a little less, about 17 square feet. And there's a formula for calculating how much skin you have, which you see here, and I'm not going to even bother with it. I tried to figure out my own area of skin and failed at it miserably and ended up doing it with a ruler and some common geometric formulae, and I'm a little over 6 feet and weigh a little over 230 pounds. So measuring various parts of me, I came up with a little over 2.25 square meters for me, or about 24.5 square feet. So that's probably an outside range, 25 square feet or less. So it's a big organ, and it's very important to us, of course. So to spend a little time on what the skin is and what it does, the skin offers us protection, not only from the external environment, but it also is important in water regulation. It allows us to conserve water when we need to, and allows us to get rid of too much water when we don't need it. So it's important in water regulation. It's very sensitive to external stimuli, various kinds of nerves that will react to heat and cold, touch, pressure, vibration, and to injury when things go badly for us. And it's very important is its role in heat regulation. The little capillaries and venules open up when we need to get rid of heat, and they close down when we need to conserve heat. So very important function of the skin is regulating heat. It's also, if we get away from our personal preferences, it's also critical as an ecological habitat, and that's what I want to talk about today. I got started on this when someone gave me a book called Human Wildlife. And I'll give you the reference for that at the end. And I thought, you know, this is really interesting stuff. And being naturally curious, as most scientists are, I decided to follow up and learn more. And the more I learned, the more I figured, you know, this would be an interesting Wednesday talk. So unfortunately for you, now you have to listen to it. Most of the flora and fauna that live on our skin are in a symbiosis with us. That is, we have a very sharply defined relationship with them and they with us. Symbiosis comes from two Greek words and it means literally living together. And there are different types of symbiosis. In a mutualistic relationship, both partners in the symbiosis benefit. There are a lot of those on our skin. In a commensal relationship, one of them benefits, the other one is not affected. There are a lot of those as well. Third type is parasitism, in which one of the organisms benefits and the other one is adversely affected. And a subset of that is pathogens. So I'm going to cover all of those, and I'm going to de-emphasize as much as possible the pathogens because we don't want to look at rotting skin for the next hour or so, or half hour, or whatever it is. So anyway, and the other thing I want to mention is a lot of you were here last week to listen to Tammy's lecture on deep sea creatures. Well, I hope to show you that there are as many creatures, at least as interesting, a lot closer than the bottom of the ocean. Well, one of the characteristics of our skin is melanin. It's a pigment, and it has an effect of preventing severe ultraviolet damage. And different people have different levels of melanin. Some people have more than others, obviously, and some it will increase depending on our exposure to the sun. So the amount of melanin in our skin does have an effect on what's living on and in our skin because of the impact of ultraviolet light. So melanin matters. I don't know who all these people are, but some of them look familiar to me, and probably some of them look familiar to you as well. Collagen is a very important protein, and it regulates the flexibility of our skin. We have a lot of collagen when we're young, and so when we're young, we usually tend to have very smooth skin. A couple of these are my grandchildren. I won't even tell you. They're going to be, this is being videotaped, and so eventually they will get to see that and say, hey, that's me. Well, so as we get older, what happens to collagen? Well, it diminishes. And as a result of its diminution, our skin starts to get wrinkled. Now, we tend not to like this all that much. It's inevitable, unless you have a huge amount of money for plastic surgery. But in general, it's inevitable. And from our point of view, not so desirable. From the point of view of the things that live on us, it's much better because it provides more habitat and it prevents possibly damaging exposure to the outside environment. So, different kinds of skin are in fact different ecosystems, and it depends on whether the skin is smooth or wrinkled. It depends on dark skin versus light skin, or the level of melanin. It depends on the external environment, and this can have an effect in a matter of minutes. It depends on the source of nourishment for the flora and fauna that live on our skin. As we age, the chemicals that we excrete in both nature and abundance, that is the nature of the chemicals, varies over time. And that will affect what lives on us. The chemicals that we put on our skin, for example, do you use something very simple like Noxzema, or do you get something that costs $30 or $40 an ounce? That will affect what's living on our skin. So the amount, what we put on our skin has an effect. And of course, antibiotics will have an effect as well. And finally, an interesting thing is where we have been and whom we have touched is going to affect what's on our skin, particularly on our hands. So here is a general outline of the different groups of organisms that live on our skin: bacteria, fungi, and yeast, arthropods, including mites and insects, viruses, worms, and surprisingly, algae. So I'm going to run through these, and I want to point out not to get bogged down in the names, because I'll be throwing a lot of names out here. And if you really want to follow up on the names, you're going to have to do your own Google search. Okay, so let's start with the bacteria. Here's some random facts about skin bacteria which are not on that sheet of paper at either end. Most of you have heard of E. coli, or Escherichia coli, named after a guy named Escherich. It's a common intestinal bacteria. It's about 2/100,000ths of an inch long, pretty small. But the smallest bacteria are only 4/1,000,000ths of an inch in size. The largest bacteria you can see without a microscope. Neither of those, smallest or largest, lives on our skin. The number of bacteria that live on our skin is often around 1 trillion, give or take 100 million, 200 million or so. And there may be as many as 1,000 different species. It's interesting that when you get an infection, when you're in the hospital, most of those infections come from your skin, which has been penetrated in some way by some instrument or another. So those are normal bacteria that get to where they are not. It turns out that in some hospitals, if you spend a week in the intensive care unit, as many as 70% of the patients will end up with some sort of bacterial infection. Discouraging. Okay. So as I said, the bacteria are pretty much good guys, almost without exception, comparatively speaking. They keep the bad guys from growing in various ways, sometimes by just outcompeting them for our skin. And they break down, they do good for us, and they break down some of the chemicals that we excrete, although sometimes they break them down into things that are equally unpleasant. And they maintain a slightly acid condition of our skin, which tends to discourage some of the pathogens that might afflict us. And usually when things go wrong, it's because the good guys have been inhibited in some way. Well, if you go on a safari, you find different habitats, and you find different habitats on your skin as well. There are places where it's oily, places where it's moist, and places where it's dry. The driest places are on the palm of the hand, the inside of the forearm, and on your behind. The oily places next to your nose, your throat, your eyebrow area, your ears, and where else on the back of your shoulders. The moist places are almost everywhere else, but particularly the axillae, or your armpits, and your groin area. So, depending on what the characteristics are of these places, it affects very strongly the resident flora and fauna. The forearms are like a desert, except when you're really exercising well. They tend to be dry. And so the most diversity of bacteria, that is the widest number of different kinds of species, are found on your forearms. The oily areas next to your nose have the lowest number of different species, but frequently the highest number of bacteria in total. And your armpits have the highest of all numbers of bacteria, but not necessarily the highest number of different species. So there you see some of the analogies here. You could read those. I don't have to go through them all. One of the things that got me started on this topic is a paper that came out a little less than a year and a half ago. It was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And if you look at this, I have to explain it a little bit. Along the horizontal axis is a number of genetic sequences, which basically translates into the number of different kinds of bacteria. On the vertical axis, the y-axis, is the number of differences, or the number of diversity. So this is genetics sequences. The more genetic sequences that you calculate, the higher the number of bacteria. That makes sense, and at some point it's just going to level off. So what this shows is, in A, that females are in red, males are in blue, that there's more diversity. This is just confined to hands. 51 people, so 102 hands. In these 102 hands, it turns out that women have more diversity of bacteria on their hands than men do. And furthermore, women have more unique kinds of bacteria on their hands than men do. So be careful. The same paper showed this. These are different groups of bacteria. It doesn't make any difference if you can't read them. That's not important. What it shows is that if you look at the difference between males and females in all of these different groups of bacteria, some may be familiar to you. There's the Staphylococcus group, or staph, the Streptococcus group, or strep, and Lactobacillus here. It turns out that for the most part, there's no difference between male and female in the kinds of bacteria we have. There are a couple of exceptions. Lactobacilli, for example, are found much more commonly on women. Strep are found about the same, and this group, Propionibacteria, found more often on men, and Corynebacteria more often on men. So there are some differences between men and women as to the kinds of bacteria that they have on their hands. The middle bar graph basically shows that after 2 hours, has to do with hand washing. After 2 hours, most of the bacteria, the resident bacteria, are back. And if you go to 4 hours and 6 hours after you wash your hands, there's not an awful lot of change, except in a couple of these different groups. This is for the resident, or the normal bacteria that live on your hands. If you go down to the sewage treatment plant and stick your hand in the outflow, then this is not going to hold. But for the resident normal flora, after 2 hours, it's all back. And the third shows the difference between your dominant hand, whether it's left or right, and the non-dominant hand. And basically, with few exceptions, you get the same bacteria on either hand. Okay? That's from the same paper that one that really got me started with this. Well, sometimes people smell, and that's really the result of the metabolism of bacteria working on our body excretions, oily or moist. This is, there was a study done on the excretions in the axilla, the armpits, and how the bacteria affected them. And it turned out that over a period of time, if you don't wash, it turns out that those chemicals that are aerosols stimulate hormone levels in women. Who knew, right? This is not an argument against no more showers. But it turns out, if you can't read this, it says, oh my God, I think I'm ovulating. So the smells that we give off are usually a result of metabolism by bacteria and fungi. Well, as I suggested, the hand is one of the more dynamic habitats on our skin. And so washing your hands is a key concern if you're worried about catching somebody else's bacteria or fungi or whatever. So that study I mentioned showed that the average palm, 102 hands, the average palm has 158 different species of bacteria on it. The range, 46 to 401, quite a large difference. And there were 4,700 different species of bacteria on these 102 hands. So there's a lot of life out there. And as I indicated before, there may be as many as a total of 1 trillion bacteria distributed everywhere on your body. So you are a walking zoo for sure. Well, here are the different groups of bacteria in a little larger font. And these areas here, which are indicated by these little arrows, are basically oily areas of your skin. These are basically dry areas, and these are basically moist areas. And all these different groups of bacteria are color-coded. And so you can see here that the oily parts of your body are dominated by different types of actinobacteria, either corynebacteria or other. The dry areas tend to have mostly proteobacteria, and the moist areas tend to have mostly corynebacteria. Most of the bacteria, the majority, are in the actinobacteria group. Secondly, the Firmicutes group, then the proteobacteria, and finally, the Bacteroidetes. So I'm going to run through some examples of these, and maybe you'll recognize some names. If you don't worry about it. 52% of the different species on our skin are actinobacteria. One of the commonest is corynebacteria. It's found on our skin in oily and moist places. That is, our armpits, between our toes, particularly the creases of your groin and your navel. Corynebacterium is salt tolerant, which is why it can live where there's a lot of moisture, because we give off salt. And it's symbiotic, particularly with Staphylococcus, or staph. Particularly in terms of nitrogen, we give off urea as a byproduct. Corynebacterium breaks it down to ammonia, and the staph uses the ammonia. So this is a symbiosis within a symbiosis. And corynebacteria also converts sulfur compounds to things that are sometimes, to certain people, attractants. Okay? Propionibacterium likes oily places. This is the genus of bacteria that is primarily responsible for acne. It lives in the oily places and feeds on the oily exudates that we produce, and it is one of the sources of body odor. Brevibacterium lives next to your nose, on your neck, on your feet, and your forehead. It causes foot odor. And if you've ever heard somebody say about Limburger cheese that it smells like stinky feet, the reason is that that's what they use to make Limburger and Port de Salut cheese, is this kind of bacterium, Brevibacterium. Okay? Makes you think, doesn't it? The second group is the proteobacterium group, and the Anthenobacterium lives in dry places and is really important, even though it's not highly abundant, because it produces antibiotic and antifungal substances. That's one of the ways it protects us on our skin. Pseudomonas is probably the most common kind of bacteria that we have on our skin, dry places and moist places. That says most, but it should be moist. And this also has antibacterial activity. And the famous E. coli lives in moist places, and it's found on the skin, mostly in the groin, because it's a common intestinal bacteria, and it sometimes creeps out when we don't want it to. And we could get it on our hands as well. This is one of the reasons you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. The Firmicutes are 24% of the bacteria that we have. Staphylococcus, you may be familiar with. S. epidermidis is common on your forearms and between your fingers. And again, this has many strains that produce antibiotic resistance because of overuse of antibiotics in various ways. And it's important because it outcompetes its cousin, Staphylococcus aureus, which is much more dangerous. But Staph epidermidis is a producer of body odor as well. And Staph aureus, or you've all heard of staph infections, you've heard of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is a big problem in hospitals because methicillin is supposed to be one of the last lines of defense of antibiotics, and there are strains of Staph aureus that are resistant to it. So if you get a MRSA infection frequently, it's very difficult to treat. And then, of course, Staph aureus is also a common source of food poisoning. It is, in many cases, benign and contributes to the maintenance of acidity of the skin, so it's not all bad. Other Firmicutes are Streptococcus mitis, which is normally found inside your mouth, but sometimes it's found around the corners of your mouth. I guess if you drool a lot, you probably have it on the outside of your mouth. Streptococcus pyogenes is another one that has antibiotic-resistant strains, and that can cause skin infection if it's in the wrong place. If you have a strep infection in your throat, for example, it's usually strep pyogenes. Lactobacillus, there are many, many species of lactobacillus. It's found in moist areas. It's found between your toes, in your groin, and in your armpit. It's very common. Different strains have different metabolisms, and so lactobacillus is very commonly used in the production of different kinds of cheese. It's used in the manufacture of yogurt and beer. It's a very common vaginal bacteria as well, and it's very important in maintaining your skin acidity. And as you'll see, when you lose that acidity on your skin, then you're liable for fungal infections, and other kinds of pathogens. Bacteroidetes include things like Brevitella. There are a lot of different ones. In fact, there are hundreds of different species, very uncommon on your skin. But inside your mouth, it forms a periodontal disease, and when it gets in through skin injury, it causes infections. So that's not a very common one, but it is there. Okay, so that's enough bacterial, long, unpronounceable, and unmemorable names. So I'll move on to fungi and yeasts. As I said, if you maintain your acidity on your skin, you're unlikely to get fungal infections. If you have a problem with a fungal infection, that means there's something going wrong on your skin for various reasons. It could be just poor air circulation. If you have very tight shoes and you keep them on for days at a time, this is the kind of thing I mean about poor circulation. Candida albicans is a common yeast that is found in the corners of your mouth normally, under arms, under breasts, and causes vaginal yeast infections. This is what it looks like in the electron microscope. There's one around someone's mouth. Sorry, have to throw some of these in. There's another one called Trichophyton tonsurans, which causes scalp infections in children, and that's this one right here. But it also can grow in your toenails and fingernails, which are part of your skin. This one came as a complete surprise to me. Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. You may have heard that on a global basis, possibly as a result of climate change, amphibians are declining all over the world, and some of them are actually have already become extinct. One of the reasons, whether it's the primary reason or a secondary reason, is a fungus called Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. So this is a fungus infection of amphibians. Now, how does it get on people? I have no idea, but it does occur on some people. This may be one way. I've never seen anyone actually do this, but certainly this is one way it could be transmitted. And it's very uncommon, but it does occur. And so if you happen to, I would suggest that you don't kiss a frog hoping that it's going to turn into a prince, because you may end up with a fungus infection. All right, the tinnias. There are 3 tinnias. Tinea pedis is athlete's foot. 3/4 of us will have athlete's foot at some point in our lives. Some of us will have it more often. Tinea cruris is commonly called jock itch, and it's usually found in the inner thighs and pubic area. And ringworm, which has nothing whatsoever to do with worms, can occur anywhere on the body. And all these tinnias are actually a fungus called Epidermophyton flacosum. Very common. But as I said, you don't really have a problem unless something goes wrong with your bacterial load. Here's another yeast called Malassezia globosa. This is one that 9 out of 10 people have. Very small numbers, never, almost never causes a problem unless something goes wrong with your skin. It's found primarily on your face, in your hair, or somewhere on your upper back. When you cover yourself with antibiotic, you have a skin infection, you cover yourself with antibiotic or use an antibiotic shampoo or something like that, kill off all the bacteria, then Malassezia has a chance to start growing. If you have excessive dandruff, for example, it feeds on dandruff and oily skin, and it can also cause dandruff. This is the genus Malassezia, that there are different species, and if you have a dog with mange, it's probably due to Malassezia. So you could get mange in your scalp as well from this. Okay, that's enough fungi. So we move to the animals with jointed feet, the arthropods. Basically, there are 2 that I'm going to mention. One are mites. This one is called the cigar with legs, Demodex. If you look to your left and to your right, you're going to see somebody that has Demodex. Between 25 and 90% of us have symbiotic relationships with Demodex. It's a little bundle of energy. It's only about 1/100 of an inch long. The cigar with legs, about 0.3 millimeters, Demodex follicularum. Where, if you had to pick a place where Demodex can be found, where would you think it hangs out? Well, I guess this is supposed to be 2 caterpillars fighting. If you guessed eyebrows, you're right. Demodex loves eyebrows and eyelashes. Here's a follicle of hair growing out of an eyebrow, and here are 3 Demodex animals. They burrow in head first, and they like these hair follicles. They also will live happily in your nose hair. They live in the hair that some people have on their ears, and they will live in your scalp, but they really like eyelashes and eyebrows the best. When it's dark and you're sleeping, they come out and walk around and go to another hair follicle. But you don't know anything about it, at least until now. But they do a service for us. They eat excessive oil secretions, they eat dead skin cells, and they can also eat harmful bacteria of various sorts. So this is, if you have a real strong magnifying glass, when you get home, look at your close friends up close and personal and see if you can find a Demodex. There's what they look like. Okay, now, when I was reading about this, I had I guess you call it a brain worm. It's probably the wrong word to use when you're talking about Demodex. But I thought, you know, I've seen that before in the movies. And it turns out if you're a Star Wars fan, I don't have to say anything more, okay? All right. A nasty little mighty mite causes a skin condition called scabies, Sarcoptes scabii. This little arthropod, this little mite, burrows into your skin. This is the dermis, the epidermis, the dermis, and the subdermis. It burrows in, leaves little poops behind it, which are very irritating. And it burrows along in your skin. Very irritating. Also, its back is covered with little spines, so as it moves forward and back, it provides more irritation, okay? So this is a nasty little thing to have. And this is a left hand, in case you're wondering what part of the anatomy is. There's an infection here on the base of the thumb and going out here and across the wrist. So that's what a scabies infection looks like. It's not really distinctive. It could be a lot of other things, but in fact, it's this little guy burrowing along in your dermis. Okay, that's enough mites. Insects. When you consider insects, or when I considered insects, I eliminated all the insects that are just temporary on our skin, and that includes mosquitoes, biting flies, gnats, and even I excluded fleas as well, because fleas may stay with you for a while, but they can hop off to breed. And that's not the case with some of these. All of the insects that live in and on our skin are parasites. I eliminated, as I said, I eliminated a lot of the ones that just bite. An exception is called the botfly. It's common in tropical areas. It does occur in Florida. Usually it's pretty rare and only in the really southern parts of the state. It's Dermatobia hominis. And the way it lives is that the adult lays its eggs on a mosquito's head. Mosquito bites you, and in the process, the eggs are deposited in your skin. The eggs hatch, and the larva lives in your skin for as much as 6 weeks. I don't know if you can see. There's an air tube there, and there's an air tube there. So it lives under your skin with a little tube, like a little snorkel going up, so it can breathe while it's living there. After about 6 weeks, it crawls out, falls to the ground, pupates, and hatches out into an adult and starts all over again. So that's really about it for flies. Insects come in 3 flavors. I'm skipping body lice because they're only temporary. Head lice lay their eggs on hair follicles. They're called nits, and they're hard to get rid of, particularly when they have outbreaks in school children, and that's called pediculus humanus. The other one is pubic lice, which are commonly called crabs. This is the most common sexually transmitted disease that is not pathogenic, and that's found in eyelashes as well, and that's called Thyrus pubis. They tend to be small. I have yet to see one of that size. Okay, moving along. Come to viruses. There are a lot of both pathogenic viruses and benign viruses, and we don't know very much about them. It turns out that the kind of viruses called bacteriophage, which infect bacteria, may be abundant on our skin. So here's a pathogen of our skin bacteria that doesn't bother us, just the bacteria. These are some of the viruses that we have that are interacting directly with our skin. Warts, papillomavirus, HPV 1, 2, and 3, roseola, which is human herpes virus. These are the ones that are rarely pathogenic. The ones that are pathogenic are shingles, which is a remnant of a chickenpox virus that every now and then erupts onto our skin and causes a problem. That comes from below rather than above or outside. Rubella and genital herpes fever blisters. It turns out that this is a potentially important medical area for research because these bacteriophages that attack bacteria have to some extent been used to treat skin infections that are caused by bacteria. So they may be important biomedically as well. Worms, again, not very many that are associated with skin. Most parasitic worms are internal. There are only a couple that are found in the skin. One of them is called Loa loa, which is an African eyeworm, and Onychocerca volvulus causes river blindness, and that lives right in your skin. Here you can see a track of a Loa loa under somebody's skin, and they are transmitted by biting flies, primarily in the tropics. They live about a year, and then after that they either die, which causes a massive skin infection, or they crawl out to breed, and here's one of them being removed from someone's eye. So they are a couple of inches long. Enough of that nasty looking stuff. And finally, algae. There are not many algae that infect our skin. In fact, there's only one, and it's called Prototheca. If you look at a highly eutrophic body of fresh water, sometimes it's covered with green scum. That green scum is very often chlorella. And this Prototheca is closely related to chlorella, except it's not green, it's not photosynthetic, and it causes a skin infection called protothecosis. So that is very uncommon as well. I don't have any statistics on how uncommon, but I think it's really rare. So that's the only algae that I know about. Well, so I think, at least I hope, that what I've shown you today is going to convince you that we are merely vessels for a huge, complex variety of ecosystems that support all kinds of life on our bodies. Most of them make our lives easier, and if we didn't have them, we would be in a lot of trouble. I had a random thought. Buddhists, I believe, consider life to be sacred. Okay? So if you take a shower, how many lives are you destroying? I don't have to deal with that philosophically, not being a Buddhist, but I wonder if Buddhists think about that at all. Okay, so there you are. These things live all over us, and they do us a lot of good. And so I would say that we have come to the end of the skin. And these are the books that really inspired me to get into this topic. And so before I go out to wash my hands, I'll try to deal with any questions you have, unless you're a dermatologist. Thank you.